And with that, it's a great way to introduce this. My name is John Pomeroy. I'm with Loops of Cape Cod, and you're watching our first ever videotaped winemaker profile. I'm sitting here with our wine manager, Robert Sacre, based in our West Yarmouth location. My name again is John Pomeroy. I'm an associate wine director here, and I am happy to say that we're here for our first ever in-person interview with winemaker from Canvasback, Rudin, who's also part of Duckhorn, and we're very excited to have you here. We're going to sort of wing this. You're kind of our canary in the coal mine of video interviews, so to speak. So thank you very much for being a part of that.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you here and hopefully to talk a little bit about your wine, a little bit about what you do and how that pertains to us and what the folks on Cape Cod and folks visiting might like to hear about you, if you could. So why don't you start by letting us know who you are and where you come from and what you make.
Thanks for having me here. My name is Rudin. I'm the winemaker for Canvasback. Canvasback is Duckhorn Wine Company's newest project in Washington State. So we are a Napa winery, 40 years old now, operating based out of St. Helena in the Napa Valley. And early on in our history, we started going to any emerging wine region that we thought something special was happening that we wanted to be part of on the ground floor. And that's what's brought us to Washington and to Red Mountain. And that's the reason. It's the reason for this fine bottle of Cabernet here from Red Mountain.
Awesome, thank you so much. I can't wait to try that. I guess we're going to be trying that in a little bit. What got you started in your career in wine?
I didn't plan to end up in wine. I grew up in eastern Washington, on the east side of the mountains where it's dry, and what has now become wine region. And in my lifetime, wine has gone from nothing to something, and is now a young industry. I wouldn't say it's a mature industry there yet, but what we are certain of in Washington State is that we have a great region for wine grapes. We have gorgeous slopes that are very dry. We're a desert. We're drier than Phoenix, in fact, out where we are. But we have an almost limitless supply of good, clean irrigation water. It's the melted Rocky Mountain and Cascade Mountain snowpacks, and it gets held as snow every year. And it's basically a completely renewable resource that we have to work with. So we have sunshine, plenty of land, gorgeous slopes, well-drained soils, and this abundant supply of water that we can irrigate with. We're a young wine region, and things are happening very quickly out there. But the reason that Duckhorn came to Washington State in the first place and invested in Red Mountain in the way that we have, just tasting the wines that were coming out of there over the last decade, there is some real potential. And you can no longer go and buy bare ground in Napa Valley and in Sonoma for a new project. It's just, for the most part, it has been planted, but not so in Washington State. There are literally tens of thousands of acres of very good ground. They're very inexpensive, and so all we need to do is apply solid viticultural technique and apply solid winemaking technique, and be able to take these and make great wines and take them out and have the acumen to sell them to people across the United States. That's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. That sounds kind of exciting to me. You say when it's not necessarily a mature industry or mature region yet for that industry. Do you feel kind of like, sort of like you're pioneering or forging ahead in some ways and less restricted by the vicinity, I guess, in order to do different things?
Yeah, if you think about it, like the experience in Europe, for example, has been a process of trial and error for the last 2,000 years. And a lot of the great sites that we know of now, the Grand Cru sites in Burgundy and all the classified regions, it took a long time for people to plant things, see what worked and what didn't work. We don't have the luxury of 2,000 years. We need to catch up fast. So I think, to add on to what you're saying, I think that a lot of the great sites and the great regions up where we are maybe haven't been discovered yet. I think it's that young that there's that kind of potential right now for discovery.
Great. That's awesome. It also sounds like you're not necessarily going through the trial and error in terms of maybe process so much as finding the right spaces and what goes best in the right spots, I guess, because you've been able to learn from previous wine regions, but at the same time you have this so unexplored territory.
Yeah,
which sounds cool to me.
It's a bit of a blank canvas, but what's nice, there's a lot of science and a lot of research that we have access to, and is to talk about an emerging wine region. One thing that's happening that's huge for us is just having research universities helping us out. So Washington State University, the Walla Walla Community College, pumping out great students filled with the latest and greatest science, and also investing a lot of money in understanding our colder climate. We face different viticultural issues than our colleagues in Napa and Sonoma and in California. We just deal with a separate set of challenges. Mostly it's growing around the cold. So it's nice having locally generated research that's pertinent to the issues that we face. We need that. And these little things, these baby steps are happening every year, it seems like.
Do you guys do any dry farming at all? Or like when are you doing all irrigation?
For the most part, we must irrigate. On Red Mountain, for example, we get 3 to 5 inches of rainfall, and most of that happens in the winter and the spring. Sometimes it will not rain at all during the growing season. So you may not see a drop of rain from June until October, which is crazy. So we must irrigate there. When you get to the margins of the Columbia Basin and you start getting closer to the foothills, there's a couple places where you can dry farm. And I would say it's not easy. If you're dry farming in Sonoma County, you might be getting 35 to 40 inches of rainfall a year in dry farming it. If you're dry farming on the east end of the Walla Walla Valley, you're probably getting like 20 inches of rainfall. So it's probably a bit of a nail biter in the warm years. You can do it, but for the most part, we have access to the water, and I don't think unless you can't get a water right to a piece of ground or you don't have access to a well, it'd be tough to do. But there's so much ground that does have water attached to it. It almost makes it so it's something you can do, but it's not a requirement by any means.
Just for the sake of, I guess, this, how would you describe your role with Duckhorn, I guess, and then specifically with Canvasback Winery?
So what's great about the way that we're set up as a wine company is that our wineries act like little independent kingdoms in a certain sense. So Goldeneye is up in the Anderson Valley, and they focus on Pinot Noir, and that's it. And all the equipment, all the tanks, the fermenters, the staff, the lab, everything is just geared towards making the best Pinot Noir in the world that they can make in the Anderson Valley. And the same thing at Duckhorn for Merlot and Cab and Bordeaux varieties down in Napa, and same thing for us. So my world really is focused very much on making one product and wake up every day trying to make Red Mountain Cabernet taste better than it ever has. And so I am the one winemaker who's probably farthest from our headquarters, which is in Napa. So we're 790 miles to the north. But I get to make wine in the region I grew up in, and for me, it's the greatest blessing in the world. It's fun for me to make wines from these relatively new soils, if you will, new to the world, let's say, and bring those wines and present them next to the wines we're making in Napa. Everyone knows Napa, and we know the quality, and we have an expectation of the richness that you should be getting from Cabernet there, but not everyone's heard of Red Mountain. And so my goal is that when we make this wine, it needs to surprise and delight. And I want people to open this and say, God, what is going on here, and where is this thing from?
I hope I have that reaction when I try it on camera for the first time. I can't imagine I won't. Awesome. This could be a good time maybe to, if you don't mind talking about the wine a little bit, maybe we can try some on camera.
Absolutely. So the wine we have here is 2015 Red Mountain Cabernet from Canvasback, and we make a little bit of Merlot, Cab Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot in support of Cabernet. So we bring in all those varieties. We start the season off every year with Merlot. Start picking around September 10th or so, and then work our way into Cab Franc and Malbec, and then we start picking Cabernet. And then I call it the Cabalanche because all of a sudden all the Cabernet comes in at once, and we'll crank through 90-hour work weeks back to back while we just handle Cab. And then we crush that for 6-7 weeks till it's all done, get it wrapped up by Halloween, and then start working into racking season. So what you have here is Cabernet-dominated blend with 9% Merlot, 2% Franc, and 1% each of Malbec and Petit Verdot. This is 2015 vintage, which for us was a warm vintage. I want to point out the Red Mountain is quite a bit further north than Boston, Massachusetts. So we're this far north in Washington State. From here, driving, it would probably take you about 4 hours of driving straight north, I think. Put you, like in the middle of Maine somewhere? Is that about right?
Yeah.
And so we're at latitude 46 degrees north. But we are a whole lot warmer than this region because we are protected by the Rocky Mountains from the Arctic air mass. And so if you think about it, it's basically flat between New England, all the way through Canada and Hudson Bay to the North Pole. There's not a whole lot of mountains to divert that cold air. So it's really easy for that cold air to come down here and keep things cold late into the spring and very cold in the middle of winter. If you're looking at a map of the United States, and we're over here on the west coast in the northwest, the Rocky Mountains sort of shoot up like this through the Rocky Mountain states up into Canada, and that cold air from Canada comes, hits the mountains, and it rediverts back over the northern plains. And so we're just standing right in the pocket, and we're in this pocket of wonderful weather, shielded by mountains, and it allows us to get an earlier start in the season, extend that generous warmth late into the fall, and the effect on Cabernet is you need all that warmth because you're trying to make something that's rich, ebullient, has powerful ripe aromas, and has texture, and it just requires a lot of heat to get there. Requires an X amount of heat. A good example is to think about Cabernet grapes as sort of the turkey of the wine grape world, and let's say Merlot and Syrah and Chardonnay would be more like a chicken. So you can cook a chicken in the oven at 350 in an hour. But to cook a turkey, you're going to need 4 hours of heat. And if your power went out and you ran out of heat somehow, if the season ends and you haven't got that requisite heat, your turkey is pink inside and your guests will not enjoy it. So so we need a certain amount. If you have too much, it's a bad thing too. There are some places in the world that are simply too warm, and we look for those sweet spot places that have just that Goldilocks weather. And Napa County is one of them. Sonoma County is another. There are little pockets all over the world of little pleasant places like this where it works. And up in Red Mountain, I think we have something special for Cabernet.
Outstanding.
So let's taste it. Let's see what's going on here. Aromatically, for me, this vintage and this wine is all about red fruits. I get, when I smell it, it smells like freshly cut ripe red strawberry, bean cherry. I get a lot of, there's a thing on this vintage, very smells like grenadine. It's like candied cherry in a certain sense, if you'll remember me. Maybe a little bit of huckleberry on the nose, but mostly red fruit in dimension with a little bit of there's a slight herbal background that reminds me of sage. All around Washington State, we have this plant that grows everywhere. It's called sagebrush, and it's almost a minty smell. You smell this wine, I can smell the sage. If when you smell the thing, you can never unsmell it, and it's all over this.
I'm super responsive to and subjective to when someone says something, I can immediately smell it, and you're like, oh, notes of grenadine, and now I'm getting it. Yeah. I've always been super susceptible to that, but I definitely, I don't think it's all, there's something to it 100%.
When it's there, it's there.
You're dead right. Yeah, that's funny.
What do you get?
Like the sage, definitely. When you mentioned it, I was almost leaning towards eucalyptus, but it's definitely more of a sage.
People say eucalyptus all the time, and it's because you have a reference of something like, what does this remind you of? And it's a really similar smell. It's kind of a minty smell. They say if the smell or the flavor comes from the earth or from the soil that it was grown in, you call it terroir. And if it comes out of the air from something that's planted nearby, we call it airwar, right? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
As much of a thing as avalanche is, I guess.
On the palate, I think for me, it's important that Cabernet Sauvignon have a lot of weight. Cabernet should be, if it was a boxer, it would be a heavyweight fighter. It's something that, in my mind, it should flood the senses and be very opulent and rich and have layers of texture. And that, to me, is when it's working. And I think about when you reach for Pinot, it should have levity and brightness and should be refreshing and lighter on the palate. And at this end of the spectrum, we're looking for intensity. And it's why I love Red Mountain for Cabernet. We have these really hot summers and these gorgeous falls, and it just builds up the textures and the weight. And on the winery side of things, there's a lot that we do to try and reinforce the evolution of tannin. So tannin is the mouthfeel portion of the wine, and we have a lot of it on Red Mountain, a lot of tannin. If you leave it to its own devices, it can be chunky and chalky and gritty, and we don't want textures like that. We want it to be lush and hedonistic and inviting. And so we work very hard in the winery to keep the processes happening in the wine that allow those tannins to evolve and get softer and gentler to the palate.
Awesome. There's definitely a a heavyweight fighting turkey, for sure. Put in your words. I'm going to steal your metaphors for sure from now on.
My question is, you obviously know a lot about wine. How long have you been winemaking? Where were you educated? Have you worked at any other wineries? And has it all been in Washington?
Nice. So I'm going into my 15th vintage in Washington State. I've only worked one vintage not in Washington, and it was in Western Australia, and it was pretty cool. But it's in a lot of sense, I'm very jealous that I can't be in other places at fall and see how harvest goes down in Napa or harvest goes down in Alsace or in Burgundy or any other place. But my heart is in Washington State, and I'll make wine there for the rest of my career. I know that's where I will be. And my education is very modest. I was a political science major in college. I didn't know that I was going to be involved in wine at all. And as I grew up in Eastern Washington, I grew up in a farm town that mostly raised apples. It's the apple capital of the world. I had no idea that it was a place that could grow high-quality wine grapes. And so after graduating college and not thinking about wine at all, and not having it in our family background, we didn't drink wine at home or anything, I just was compelled by the idea of the transformation that places were going back home. And when people started growing grapes and making wine, it started attracting more tourists. And when more tourists came, it started attracting better hotels and soon better food, better restaurant. And all of a sudden, the quality of life in my hometown was slowly elevating, and everything was getting better all the time. Now we know that the wine industry has brought all these tangible benefits in terms of just far more influx of tourism dollars, of retail dollars, of restaurants, everything, talent, people coming from outside bringing ideas, and it's really transformed. It's transformed the landscape and place where I've grown up in a very, very great way. And I just feel lucky to have been there at all and been able to get my foot in the door. Not long after I got out of college, I just started working Joe jobs at wineries, driving the truck and driving forklift, and pretty soon running lab analyses. And I worked my way up, and I worked at several other wineries before coming to Canvasback. I was already a winemaker for another property in Walla Walla when this opportunity came along. And just knowing Duckhorn Wine Company and knowing the quality that they put behind everything, and having there be a buzz in the air about this big famous Napa winery coming to our little old town in Washington State and making a big investment was exciting, and I feel lucky to have gotten on board.
With your contacts with Duckhorn, I know you get to communicate with a lot of the other winemakers. Have you been to their wineries and been part of their winemaking at all, or you just when you're up for harvest, you're in Washington the whole time? Do you ever participate in any of the other winemaking harvests with any of the other vineyards?
Yeah, so fortunately, harvest kicks off in California about a full month before we start up in Washington State because we're so much cooler of a region, less heat. And full respect to my friends in California, I don't mean cooler, you get me. We're not. Yeah, it's been great to be able to start harvest down at our other properties in California and just hang out and basically shadow the other winemakers around and just get a glimpse of what they're looking for when they go out and sample a vineyard and see if it's getting ready to pick or not. And which is great because especially I don't work with Pinot, and so getting to be down at Goldeneye and taste Pinot right on the cusp of ripeness, I normally don't have that opportunity. And there's been several vintages where I've done that for a week or two, and then I have to get back up to Washington and get ready for our own harvest. It's just the planning required. But all of our other properties are in California, mostly Northern California. And so I get, fortunately for me, I get to be down all the time tasting blends at our other properties, at Paradox, at Goldeneye, at Duckhorn, at Decoy. One nice thing about having as many different projects going on under our portfolio is that we have so many talented winemakers and assistant winemakers and enologists and the viticultural staffs, and everybody is bringing their A game. We have a very strong bench, and so whenever I'm down and get to be around our other production team members and taste the wines that they're working on and get to sit in on the blends, it's always really rewarding to me because I get to see it through their eyes, and I understand because I've walked in their shoes, but you get very focused on your own projects and the way that you approach your winemaking, and it's fun to share notes. And I've learned so much from my colleagues.
I was going to ask, there must be some sort of, little give and take where you might adopt some method or something, some approach that they have that you might not have
Yeah,
maybe vice versa.
I steal good ideas all the time.
That's one way to put it. I was going to say that. And then I hope you impart some good ideas to them as well, or maybe they're stealing your ideas. Who knows?
It's fun. It's awesome when you start asking someone like, "Hey, so what did you do to get here? Like, how did you achieve this texture? Or what did you do to get this slight autolytic note or whatever the thing is?" And then you start getting into it. And I've learned a lot. Actually, I'd say one takeaway thing that I learned from Renee Airy, who is our Duckhorn winemaker. She does this really cool thing at the top tier of our Bordeaux wines. She makes a wine called The Discussion, which is a Cabernet-based Bordeaux blend from our estate vineyards in Napa. And she will load that wine up in mostly new French oak when it's young, and extract the oak early. And then by second or third racking, the second or third time that it's removed from barrels, maybe 6 to 8 months before bottling, she'll take out half that new oak and she'll put it back down into relatively neutral barrels. And it gives the oak all that extra time to integrate, but it actually, so you extracted oak up front, but then because you gave it time to integrate and for those flavors between the oak and the wine to really marry, by removing it from the oaky environment of the new barrel, it seems so much more creamy and so much more voluptuous around the edges and softer, and yet it has all the reinforcement and the accenture that you want from oak. And the effect is just is beautiful, and I've never once considered that. I mean, always try and get the oak balanced and stick with it, and keep the percents relatively static, the same over 2 years. But I was really impressed by that, and I tried it on our 2015 reserve wine, and it was magic. I've been making wine for years, and I'd never thought about that idea. So then the next year, we stole the idea to an even higher degree and applied it to more barrels. And now I'm all in. Thank you, Renee, for smooth ideas. That's one example.
That's awesome. No, that's great to hear too, because I think that spirit of collaboration is really cool in general. But just, you're all working, I guess, in one cohesive Duckhorn, umbrella. But it's just nice that you're different methods that wouldn't occur to you. You learn from someone else. Do they get out there during your harvest as well, or
not so much during harvest? But I get a lot of visitors from California all the rest of the year. So in next week, the assistant winemaker from Duckhorn, Sarah Zaneski, is coming up, and we'll just spend the entire time just tasting wines, talking, popping in on vineyards, and it's just cross training. The more we talk and share knowledge and share ideas, the better off we all are. When she comes up, also our head of grower relations for Napa Valley. So grower relations is the person who coordinates all the different vineyards who are growing grapes for us, contract grapes for us. She's the person who's in those vineyards on a daily basis, just making sure they look good and requesting a leafing if it's needed, or dropping crop, or making adjustments and getting the fruit dialed really nice. And she has a great eye. So it's good to bring them up. They'll share ideas. I know I'm expecting I'll learn something from them, and I'll try and leave them with some little nuggets of wisdom about how things are done in Washington. But it's all in that spirit of sharing. We'll say this, there's another thing that's cool in that mode is we don't have any centralized winemaking. So there's no one person who's saying, hey, I think you need to make the wines like this, or over at GoldenEye we want to see them more like this. They basically just turn us loose and say, make the best wine you can that you know how to. And so you are given this great gift, which is the direction just to go out and make the best thing you know how to, and no other direction beyond that. Actually, sometimes maybe it's a little bit too free. It'd be nice to be like, hey, we need to see these 5 things, and if you do that, you're good.
We have so much more fear of, okay, am I doing it right if I'm not getting the direction? But I mean, I guess no news is good news, and I guess you would hear if something was going terribly wrong.
No, that's delicious. I mean, a lot of times the Washington State Cab or Merlot, you think of really big, heavy, rugged wine, but this has a lot of finesse and very smooth. It's a great bottle.
I think you nailed it. They are by their nature, Washington wines by their nature have a bit of a rugged texture, and I think that's part of their appeal. But I think it puts it on our job is we need to refine that. Mm-hmm. And so you take this raw ingredient which has so much flavor and so much tannin and so much acid, and it's our job to shape it to where we want to be. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal for doing that, and it's through natural methodology. With Cabernet, our tools are time, air, barrels, and temperature. You can actually achieve quite a bit just with the wine being the right temperature at the right time. Timing matters a lot, but we're very focused on the textures. I appreciate the comment because we put a lot of thought and focus into how this feels on your palate. The mouthfeel to me is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't do your job and you just put it in a barrel and forgot about it, you would end up with something that would age very well, but would be a bit rough for the first 10 years with the kind of power that we have up on Red Mountain. And so I just, it's like putting a harness on a horse. It's a powerful creature, but if you with a little bit of help, it'll go where you want it to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time,
Thank you.
Sharing your wine with us, sharing your knowledge with us. Is there any place you'd like us to go check out as far as plugs for you? Do you have a website you'd like to point, aside from coming into our store, to check out and purchase Canvasback Red Mountain Cab?
If you go to duckhorn.com, every winery and every wine in our stable is under that one umbrella. And so we have amazing projects in the North Coast and the Central Coast of California. Goldeneye, Paradox, Decoy, Calera, now Costa Brown, and Migration. We have stunning wines at each of these labels, and I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues are putting out every day, and I feel lucky to get to be part of it at all.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.